look, we're family. We're going to hash things out like family. If that means we're going to fight sometimes, we're going to fight.
We got to go in the back and we'll shoot free throws for it.
I was going to go fisticuffs, you know.
The interview that you're following up.
I saw that and I don't appreciate it. I don't appreciate following up a UFC championship fighter with Chris Fleming. Like next episode, we have Chris.
We have a guy named Chris.
Look, let me tell you, in those regards, Impa did us all a favor by just having on a t-shirt and sitting down while he was doing that conversation. So we didn't see what none of us have, what none of us are probably ever going to have.
Yeah, that's fair.
That was a fun one though. It was fun to talk to somebody, you know, outside of the industry, that it's sort of a reminder that so much of what we do, what you do, what the people on your team do, that we're all just still a bunch of human beings that are generally motivated relatively similarly. We generally have similar problems and similar challenges. And what do you do to knock through some of that? So while we're already recording, by the way. This is how we roll on the walk. Once you start going for the walk, you're going for the walk. There is no start and stop, right?
Fair enough.
I guess we should start off by saying, Chris Fleming, welcome to the walk. Thank you for spending a couple minutes with us.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. I don't appreciate who I'm following up against, though.
So Impa Kasang and I will appreciate that. Take it as a compliment. Maybe what we'll do, Thomas, I'll interview you maybe for like a 5-minute interview, and we'll plug it in between Impa and Chris.
Oh, gee, thanks.
Is that okay?
I'll follow up for you. I'll take the hit for you.
So Chris Fleming, head of sales at Waterstone Mortgage. We've known each other for a little while now. Always enjoyed working with you and your insight on things. I've got a handful of things I'd love to ask you and talk about. I want you to open it up as well. There's probably things that you'd love to talk about or get off of your chest. Look, the reality is there's been nothing going on this year, 2020. I don't know what we could possibly talk about.
Well, the funny part is when you emailed me yesterday, which I did not respond to, I noticed that today. It's out of my outbox, saying, hey, anything you want to chat about? And my intention was to reply, COVID, politics, and religion.
Let's go. I'm ready. Where do you want to start? How about what?
Anywhere but any of those.
So no politics, no religion. Well, we can talk about COVID a little bit.
Sure. We can talk about COVID.
Well, so how's it been? You keeping everybody healthy? I mean, I know you guys had to make some adjustments there at the company, and every industry, every company that you compete with or that you work with, everybody's made adjustments. How have those been managed? What are you seeing sort of in the midst of it right now?
Man, you know, I tell you, I'm consistently impressed. And mind you, this last 7 months feels like 3 years. And thinking back to when this started, it's like, really, that was only 7 months ago? Was it 7 months ago? But I was so amazed with not only the technology we had in place that allowed us to literally one day prior to everybody shutting down saying, sorry, we're going to go virtual. You're all going to work from home. Our IT tickets went down. Nothing, I mean, literally nothing changed. Everybody picked up and everybody at our company, you know, just really stepped up, for lack of a better word, and made it work. And we made it work with little to no infrastructure changes. So we didn't have to go out and invest tons of dollars in these new technologies because we'd already been experimenting with them, if you will. So we already had them in place, and our IT team just did a phenomenal job of facilitating whatever these people needed to start to work from home. If that's screens, monitors, systems, Wi-Fi help with just understanding how home Wi-Fi works. So yeah, it's really, really been a positive experience. I know that all of those people are eager to get back to maybe not so much the office, but the office interaction, because that's definitely lacking right now. But unfortunately in Wisconsin, I think it's going to be a bit yet as we keep leading the nation in things we don't want to lead the nation in.
Well, agreed. And we can talk about those numbers, and we'll leave that for another conversation, what to make of the rise in the numbers. But the reality is as a whole, you know, the country is going to be overly sensitive right now. And so we're going to adjust to it. And it's sort of like the mask conversation. There's people that think we should be wearing masks or you shouldn't be wearing masks. But you know, what I always say is to people that I've talked to that just adamantly are opposed to wearing a mask. The next question is, do you want things to get back to the way they were? And of course, the answer is yes. If there's a 2% chance that wearing that mask a little bit more will just help get things back to where isn't that a reason to do it? I mean,
100%.
so,
All day long.
that's right. So let's just go do it. I was listening to you talk about technology a little bit, and technology was already such a big part of the conversation in our industry over the last couple of years, and how technology is going to impact the borrower experience, how technology can support capacity for mortgage companies. I think back to TRID, and when TRID was going down, a lot of companies that weren't prepared and really suffered the consequences for not being prepared. It feels like the industry as a whole, though, and maybe it's because of going through TRID, was more prepared to make the adjustment and having at least some foundation of technology solutions in place to accomplish what you just described.
Yeah, I mean, I think our industry as a whole requires some level of communication software that's going to allow us to be outside. Loan officers in general for years and years have been working outside the office and facilitating their business in coffee shops or restaurants or wherever it may be. So we've had those things in place. But to do it on a scale in which everybody does it, it was a bit of an adjustment. We had to change some things up and maybe add a scanner here or there. But ultimately, it's been really, really good. I think it really forced, I would say 5, 6, 7 years of technology into the mortgage industry that was much needed over the period of 5, 6, 7 months.
Right.
Because quite frankly, we haven't invested in it, not we as a company, we have. But we as an industry haven't invested in the technology that we really need going forward. And I think this has forced some of that change, which has been really good.
How project that ahead a little bit, maybe for me in your mind, and maybe what discussions are happening at the executive level at your company, and any mastermind groups that you may be a part of with executives at other companies. As we project that out a little bit, do you there's some feeling that the environment that we're in and how it has forced the use of technology, and how companies were semi-prepared and they're now probably more prepared than ever, does that then lead to a quite the resurge or the growth on the consumer direct side? Does this now, look, you support loan officers across the country, and for the most part, these are loan officers that know how to leverage technology, but they're not consumer direct loan officers in the sense of old school consumer direct. I'm curious to get your take on that a little bit as you project out the next 6 months and the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, going into this year, I was a big advocate of looking at some consumer direct channel to stand up within Waterstone. Obviously, because of the volume, it kind of got sidetracked. But I see, change happening. That change being, we're seeing more of the consumers come to the loan officers prior to anything else at this point. And I think that's part of social driven campaigns. I think that's part of technology investments and website investments and investing in the infrastructure of your company, making sure you're seen out there. For example, we redid our websites, and our IT team, our marketing team did a phenomenal job, and they spent a considerable amount of time in doing these websites. And when we looked at it, it wasn't just, hey, let's put out a website so they can put an app in there. It was, okay, what do we want this content to be? What are we trying to drive? Who are we trying to drive there? And when we looked at it, we really want to drive the traffic to educating the consumer, educating that borrower, because one, there's a lack of it in this industry. Most borrowers don't know what they actually need to get qualified for a mortgage. But two, we're seeing that shift. We're seeing the consumer start to do the research online before going and getting the realtor. Way back when, they used to come to the loan officer first. They go to the bank, they meet with the loan officer, determine what they were qualified for, and then they would meet with a realtor that was suggested. The realtor would scour the classifieds, and they'd go find the house of their dreams. Well, that kind of shifted to where they started going to the realtor first. The realtor was then referring them to us, and we get them qualified, which is kind of opposite of what we should be doing, in my opinion. You need to get qualified before you're wasting the realtor's time, in my opinion. So we started to see that shift. We started to see the consumer start to approach the loan officer earlier in their time frame, prior to even thinking about getting a house, just wanting to educate themselves for the 12 months down the road when they might be able to get a house, or looking for what steps it would take to purchase that house 12 months down the road. So in seeing that change, that's going to drive consumer direct to be more prevalent. And I'm not saying that we as a company should say, okay, consumer direct is where it's going. We obviously have some really good retail presence in tons of different markets. Florida and New Mexico, Arizona are all huge markets for us. And to go into those cities and those areas with consumer direct in mind, there's obviously a conflict of interest there. But to target some of the states that we don't have presence in, to target some of the markets that might be good for us to start to get into, I think that's going to be huge for us. I think that there's a lot of good companies out there that are looking at very sophisticated technology to start to drive and help and ease that process. So I do think there's going to be a big push for that in the future.
And consumer direct isn't, we say consumer direct, but consumer direct is not consumer direct anymore. I mean, there's so many variations of what that actually means. And so kind of what I'm hearing from you is the opportunity to leverage the tools that usually exist inside of a consumer direct model to almost create additional value, not only for the consumer, of course, but for the connection that consumer ultimately has with your originator in a distributed model potentially.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Thanks for pointing that out. Consumer direct means something different to everybody. In my small mind, in my world, I want it to be something that educates the consumer, because we know that there's a nurturing period here. We can help to be that educator. We can help to facilitate that trust, that understanding of the process. And in the meantime, we're building a client for life, somebody that's going to turn to us, and somebody that when it comes time to purchase that home, we can say, okay, here's the realtor that we might suggest you use, or here's the loan officer that's going to take you from start to finish. But to really put the information out there and drive it into your data source and start to educate them through the process.
We need to come up with another word for consumer direct at this point. I mean, maybe call center is call center, and then consumer direct is sort of everything either in between. Or I mean, the reality is most good originators today are using some tools that are normally, back in the day, we would think of as consumer direct type tools, whether it's a connection to Zillow or realtor.com, or even to go as far as online lead generation like Lending Tree, Lower My Bills. But we're looking at Credit Karma, we're looking at Bankrate, like we have connections to those platforms. And the reality is those are just additional tools that, when used properly, can help an originator and the consumer perform the function of closing a mortgage more effectively.
No, absolutely.
So, well, let's not talk about consumer direct this whole for the next 20 minutes. With as wild as this year has been, I think we've all learned a lot about each other. You've probably learned a lot about people on your team and supporting people through, work-life balance difficulties. On the one hand, we have originators that are doing more business and making more money than many of them have ever made and may ever make again in a single year. On the other hand, you have ops staff that needs a vacation really, really bad. Backing up a little bit as we get into kind of the human side of this, you were an Arizona guy that ends up in Wisconsin. So I got to ask first, are you sporting the Cardinals right now? Are we Kyler Murray? And
yeah, they're my number one. My Green Bay's number two. And before we move forward, I do want to point out that we have lots of loan officers that need a vacation too. You
I have no doubt.
Ops staff, they're tested, they're processors, underwriters, closers. They are all just beat up. And sometimes I feel like the loan officers themselves get missed in that equation, because they think everybody thinks they're out there just celebrating. And they are, and they should be, but they're exhausted. Everybody, the industry wide, I've never seen so much exhaustion, period. But
well,
yes,
no, go back to football, then we'll come back to this again.
Okay, yes, I am a Cardinals fan. I will always be a Cardinals fan. There's never going to be a time that changes. I went to the Cardinals Super Bowl when they lost to the Steelers, which was horrific.
I watched it on television with my wife, who's a Steelers fan. I'm sorry.
That is sorry. But I am a Green Bay fan, number two. And I've always kind of been a Green Bay fan. I don't know if they were ever my number two, but they are a solid number two now. And I have made, and this is my proclamation to the world now, I will raise my children as Green Bay fans.
What?
Yes.
So you said earlier that you didn't want to talk about religion, but you've kind of crossed over into religion at this point. You realize that, right?
Around here, yes, absolutely. And that's exactly—
I see you keep glancing over to the side. Are you afraid a Packer fan is going to come in here and do something damaging while you talk about the Cardinals?
We only have about 20 people in our office right now.
Literally,
I could start shouting and nobody would hear me.
That's great. So your progression in the industry, I think, did you grow up in Arizona,
I
Scottsdale
did. I
area?
was in Arizona for about 27 years. I grew up in I grew up in primarily California in Scottsdale. I
Okay.
was in California about 10 years, and then I moved over to Arizona with my parents. My parents eventually transitioned back to California, now back to Arizona, oddly enough.
Okay.
Yeah, Arizona for about 20, 25, 27 years.
And then we've talked about it before, but and maybe we can talk about it a little bit, but your introduction to the industry, you started off more on the operations side. You kind of progressed into secondary before you made that move over to sales. Talk about that a little bit. First of all, how did you get into the mortgage industry?
Well, I think like so many of us, I kind of accidentally got into it. It's not something I'm proud of. Okay, maybe a little bit. I actually got fired from my job, and I called my buddy. His name's Travis. And I said, Travis, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just got fired. He's like, why'd you get fired? Yelled at my manager. Probably shouldn't have done that.
What was the job? You have to say that. What were you doing?
I worked at a hotel. I worked the front desk. I was supposed to be promoted to the manager at front desk, and I didn't. And I took it very poorly. I was immature. Sorry. But I actually loved working at the hotel because I got to meet different people every day. We had Harlem Globetrotters that used to come and stay with us. We had different rookies from football teams across the nations training for the draft that would come and stay with us. So it was really cool getting to meet all these people. And I really thought that's what I wanted to do forever. I thought manage a hotel, buy a hotel, own a hotel.
Right.
But I got fired. And then I called my buddy Travis and I said, man, I don't know what you can do. He's like, come over here. I'll get you a job. I was like, what do you mean you'll get me a job? He worked at a company, I believe it was called Eventual Mortgage at the time. And sure as heck, I went over there, met with the manager there. And she said, yep, you can start. Here's your desk. Here's a file, enter it into the system. And literally for the first probably year of my career was just data inputting, last name, first name. And that kind of progressed to where I got promoted into the lock department and the lock desk, and I started overseeing secondary. Had some opportunities with a different company to go and manage their secondary, and worked into to running their secondary and kind of dabbling in other things like origination at a time and just different avenues. And it was an interesting time in the industry because you could do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then eventually came on with Waterstone when the industry got a little crazy, and really never looked back since. It's been fun.
Was there a point at which you were looking at originators and saying, I mean, look, you're a guy that had experience at a hotel, and what clearly you liked about that was the people part of it, was meeting people and helping people and generally having conversations with people and building relationships. Was there a point where you were looking at the sales side of the mortgage industry and saying, that's what I want to do at some point? I mean, what caused that transition?
I would have loved to be an originator if they came with a really big fixed salary. That was
Wait, did you just say that out loud?
Yes. That was always my drawback, right? I didn't want to just base it solely on commission. What happens the month? I'm more of a planner. I'm regimented. Not that loan officers are not planners, but I get a bit scared when I don't have that structure in place. So I feel like needing that structure has always moved me and gravitated me away from that you kill what you kill.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the reasons why ops staff generally stays ops. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. It is a mentality. There's a security component to it. It's a bet on yourself kind of thing that we probably all have inside of us at some level, but sometimes it's hard to pull that out. But you did make the jump. You did make the jump over to the sales side where either all of your pay at some point or some larger portion of it was probably tied to commission. Was that I have two questions. Number one, was that a difficult transition? Number one. And number two, do you think having had the foundation of operations and secondary helped you? I mean, it must have, right?
Well,
although it could have hurt you as well. Maybe you put your brain into it too much.
Yeah, and to be fair, I never took the complete jump. I always, even in the heyday of things, I always kept a salaried position. And I mean, you were in the industry at the time with the loans were raining from the sky in the days of HARP and then days of that of subprime. You couldn't help but originate. So I never really took the whole. I never took the leap to where it would have been a catastrophe if I didn't originate anything. I always had, a job within the branch doing something else.
And that's interesting. I didn't think you'd say that. Like that was a surprise to me that you have that adverse sort of, or you did, maybe still do, of commission only. Yet you're supporting so many commission only people. Like, how is that?
God bless
If
them
that
for
doesn't come if it doesn't come naturally for you, does it make it more difficult? Or maybe you have some perspective that they need to hear, since that's not something that comes naturally for you.
Yeah, I would say yes, it makes it difficult because I often find myself having to step out of my shoes and step out of my comfort zone and put myself in their shoes. And a lot of, even with my executive team, I think we have to remind ourselves, salespeople, I shouldn't say salespeople, relationship builders, because that's what they are. They're not salespeople. They build relationship. That's what they excel at.
Right.
They just operate differently than the vast majority of us. They have different motivators. They have different things that they're going to feel success in, and you need to speak to those things. You need to understand those things if you're going to understand why they're getting frustrated because one refinance didn't close in the best month ever.
Right.
You need to understand their thought process, their mentality, and why they're successful. They're successful exactly because they're mad about one refinance that didn't close in their best month ever. So yes, I mean, I think it's taken me some time, and I'm still learning and evolving, but understanding, what triggers them, why it's triggered them, and stepping out of my own shoes and saying this is just crazy, and understanding that this isn't crazy for them. This is just the way they need to think in order to be great at what they do.
Are there things that you have found yourself doing over the last 6 months, 7 months, 8 months? I mean, during this wild ride, where you're not just getting on a plane. You can't just go to their branch and take them out to dinner or pat them on the back or give them a hug. Are there some things that you've incorporated to keep yourself close to the street, so that when they're having those moments, they feel that physical connection and your ability to listen to them? Well, I'm curious, some tools maybe you've incorporated to make sure you're not missing that opportunity.
Well, the one thing I would say, nothing beats in person, in front of them, meeting the team, talking to the team, especially in times like this, letting them understand, letting them know you care, and hopefully making these visits to the branches not seem like, oh, the executive team's at my branch, but oh, Chris is at my branch, so it becomes more common. But we've implemented. I don't pick up the phone and call people anymore. I Zoom them. We have some Jabber infrastructure that I can dial out, use my camera to make sure I'm seeing them, because emails, texts, even phone calls, they come in personal. You miss the cues, you miss the frustration on their face, or when they roll their eyes at me because I've said something stupid.
Right.
So you get those things. So I really do try, as much as I get kind of video tired, if you will.
Yeah.
I try to get on video as much as I can. We're also doing lunches through the branches, so we're rotating through the branches, and it's not just the originators, it's not just the managers. It's get your team together, or wherever they are. We'll buy you lunch. Let's get in a Zoom call and let's just talk. It doesn't have to be business. You don't need to know. I talk about pricing exceptions or underwriting exceptions. How you doing? What's going on in your family? What's stressing you? So trying to do more on that, and we've kind of gone through one or two iterations of that. And I think as we do it more and more often, because quite frankly, the processors, the LPs, they're not used to seeing me on the screen. They're not used to hearing me in the office or the executive team. So as they get more comfortable with this, I feel like the conversations are going better, and it's really done a better job of building out total relationships versus just a relationship with myself and the manager.
You made me think of something that I don't think I've thought about up until this point. I wonder, and I would bet that it's created maybe a better level of connectivity to the ops staff, to the staff that typically, to your point, isn't seeing your face. They're not getting on a Zoom call with you. That might be a benefit that we haven't thought about.
Well, yeah, it's to the team at large. It's not just sales. And mind you, it's not just me on this calls. I mean, we're bringing in IT support. We're bringing in post-closing people they never even knew existed in our world. And we're all trying to get on the phone and have these conversations, build relationships, marketing, IT, whoever it may be. There's always a few of us on the call talking to everybody. And again, we really want to get away from the call being, just answer questions about problems, and let's chop it up. Let's talk. Let's have a good time. And by the way, I bought you lunch, so eat. I find like food is the best motivator ever. And
even over a Zoom call.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The people are probably more likely to actually eat their food on a Zoom call than when you're at a table all waiting for each other to take a bite or whatever.
They are, and nothing's worse than when Zoom freezes, when you're like,
Oh yeah. Well, that's usually me. Why is it that when your video freezes, you're never like in a super cool pose? It never happens that way.
I have decided it's just because I don't have any super cool poses.
That very well. So maybe we have that in common, Chris. Maybe that's not the answer I wanted to hear, but that very well may be the answer. Hey, I was thinking, going back to our conversation around your progression, one of the things that's come up in some of my conversations on the walk has been the lack of a real clear industry sort of direction or progression to management. So as an industry, generally what we do is there's a really good originator and they're ready for the next thing. And there's nothing to really give them. You reach a point where I can't compensate you anymore. The pie is the pie and there's no more slices left. I can't give you, you've gotten the LOA that you wanted, or maybe we'll give you a second one so you can do more volume, but there's still something missing. And then ultimately, as an industry, and not every company, of course, but we give them an opportunity to manage. And the reality is a lot of them shouldn't manage. They don't know how to manage. They haven't been trained to manage. Some of the best originators are the worst managers. They're the greatest originators, are the worst managers. Have you thought about that much? I'm curious to get your take on that progression and how you manage that sort of progression.
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, you run out of options. It's okay. We've given you everything. Poof, you're a manager. But our industry as a whole, and quite frankly, because our industry does that, top loan officers think that's the natural progression of my course.
Right.
Where you have to step back and think, should it be? But yeah, we put these super producers in management positions and then don't give them the skills to actually manage people effectively. We're fortunate as a company that I have nothing but phenomenal leaders within the field. I have nothing but phenomenal originators. I know everybody says that, but it's true here.
It's like the way we talk about our children. My boys are the best.
Oh no, my kids are better than yours. But we have managers that say, hey, look, I don't know how to do this right. Teach me, help me. I feel like we have a very high percentage of thirsting for knowledge and open and listening. And that might have to do more with my predecessor than myself. A guy named Kevin Allen, he was exceptional and still is. He's not doing go anywhere. He was exceptional at sitting with you, active listening, making sure that he was dialed in, he was focused, he hears what you're saying, repeating some things back to you that he heard you state of concern, and working with you through those things. And I got to step into his shoes here, and I get to work with these managers that have been coached up by him for years. And I think that's some of my benefit here. But it never stops. I can never stop learning. I need to continue to grow. I need to continue to grow as a leader. One of my decisions to move to Wisconsin was just that. It's okay. I'm a regional in Arizona. What's my next step? And it's I want to grow somewhere. I thrive on education. I really want to learn. I really want to grow. And I thought that next step, was move to Wisconsin, sit next to the CEO, learn from the CEO. Now, I'm not saying that that's my next step, but that's who I'm going to learn from. And that's my best opportunity to learn.
Boy, that is something that I think so many people just miss, and something else we talk about a lot on this series and conversations I just have with people in general. I think naturally I'm not good at it, so I have to constantly remind myself that every conversation you have with someone, there's an opportunity to learn something that you didn't know before you had that conversation. And sometimes you don't know what you learned until a year later, or 3 years later, or 5 years later, when you react to something where this little seed was planted. Mm-hmm. And you got that from Kevin, and you've gotten that from other people as well. I think that says a lot. I think that's an indicator of who you are. You've put yourself in a position to learn from other people. I think sometimes that's tough for loan officers and even branch managers in our industry. They're so busy trying to get the next loan. They're so busy trying to close the next deal that you end up just working in your business and rarely working on it. And that's a tough thing. Culturally, clearly you have that, and you push those around you to look for those opportunities. I've got one more question before we break, but before I ask, is there anything you want to talk about? Anything top of mind for you? Anything you've seen recently or read, or industry or non-industry related?
Nothing springing to mind, and that's probably because I've just got off a day long of Zooms and calls and everything else. It's kind of the tail end of my day. Oh, and we just got a tornado alert. Or
No
warning.
way.
Yeah.
Well, if I see the window blow out, that would be really great for the podcast, but maybe not good for you.
Right. It's interesting because that's not something we would have in Arizona. No, but specifically, you know, I wanted to talk through that transition from COVID and what we've seen with the industry and that burnout.
Yep.
So we kind of already touched on that, but I think that burnout is something that we're going to continue to see, because I don't think volumes are going to significantly slow enough to where people can step back
Right.
for at least the next 3-4 months.
Right.
So it's something as an industry that we haven't necessarily had to deal with before. And we've dealt with a lot, but we haven't necessarily dealt with overwhelming volumes. You know, you mentioned TRID earlier. Early is going to be the next iteration of TRID. That's going to be a challenging time for our industry. And if volumes are so high like this, it's going to make it more challenging.
Well, so my last question was really kind of along those lines, not TRID so much, but anything. And that is, what are you, as you kind of crystal ball it a little bit and you look at 2021, what are some of the things that are top of mind for you and those that you support, not only going into the year, but as you kind of play this out 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now?
Replacing refinance production. And not because we want set company records or because it's generating all this revenue, but because I think loan officers have a thirst, and this is quenching that thirst right now. So, you know, we have loan officers several that are doing over $100 million this year. This is a milestone for them. They're not going to want to go back to $50-60 million.
Right.
So it's how do we help them get to, you know, $100 million next year, trying to subsidize the 40 to 50% of refinance volume that we're not going to see anymore. How do we help them generate more purchase business? What tools can we give them to make them more successful going forward next year? Because quite frankly, I feel like if we let their volumes go back to quote unquote normal levels, they're not going to be satisfied. And if they're not satisfied, we all know what that looks like from an industry.
Right.
So,
well, and from an attrition perspective for each individual company, because ultimately that's where that all plays into the same process of, are you staying in front of your teammates? Are you staying in front of not only your loan officers, but your managers and your area managers, so that you can feel when they're sensing some level of frustration?
Right.
But because there is going to be a big attrition pop once
Right.
things start to slow down a little bit, for two reasons. Number one, not everybody stays in front of their core group like you do. Number two, there's pain that's going to be realized because now the money's not flowing anymore. So now that pain is being realized and you think that somebody else can help solve that pain. But number three, and the one that's probably going to be the most frustrating, is just that the volume's dropped off and they got to blame it on somebody.
Mhm.
And so you get a phone call at the right place, right time. And maybe you make a move to something that's not ultimately greener pastures. The other thing that I thought of as you were talking was, you know, 3 or 4 months out. Well, if we think that 3 or 4 months out is where we start to see a little bit of the tick down, which is going to happen, we just don't know exactly when. Well, then that means that everybody still has time to be able to do some planning and work
Mhm.
on their business and not just all of a sudden be in that moment. And especially for managers, I know that strategic growth is something that you take seriously and you keep top of mind. This has not been a year where branch managers are setting records in the amount of loan officers that they're recruiting, because even the ones that say, hey, I want to be with you, they've got $10-20 million pipelines. It just doesn't make good business sense for them to make the move right now. But what you recognize is that process can't stop. The process has to continue so that you can take advantage of the proper environment when the opportunity is right. So I love everything that you had to say. Well, I think I'm good, man. You're great. You're always fun to talk to. I'm watching CNBC in the background. I can't really see what the market's doing, but I shouldn't be paying attention to that anyway.
Yeah. We can't control it, so who cares?
That's right. That's right. All right. Anything else you need from me before we break?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, Chris, you're the best. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us on the walk, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right, bud.
Bye, man.